All right, good morning. This is Melissa Ryan with Mindy Laczynski.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, and I'm going to have her introduce herself here shortly, but first just to speak to our title, which is caring for yourself so you can care for others. And what we really want to bring to this video and why you should stay tuned for our talk is talking about how to identify if you're a person that's very passionate about what you do in the world, whether that's for a living or service work or within your own family. If you have work that is meaningful for you and your heart is invested, how to take care of yourself so you can continue to do that work, so you continue to find meaning and satisfaction with it. So I'm going to have Mindy introduce herself. We're here in her office talking about the awesome work she does with helping professionals and just people at large who are looking for that support.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning. I'm Mindy Laczynski. I've been in private practice here in Golden for about 5 years, but I've been in the field for, 20, I think.
Ooh, congratulations.
Thanks.
That's exciting.
Yes. A lot of my early years were spent in community mental health, nonprofit sectors, just working with, just the most impacted, the most oppressed, and, just really seeing that the toll and the cost, essentially to self that doing heart-centered work takes, and was privileged to be part of a program that really got to support helping professionals, teachers in particular, in their own secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and helping them in their own self-care. And so I just feel like the path unfolded over the years, and so it's come to be something I'm really passionate about, is supporting others who's put their heart into their life's work, and trying to do meaningful work and work that hopefully changes things for the better in the world.
That's impactful.
That's impactful.
Yeah. And so I imagine, since you're doing work that is heart-centered, that's meaningful for you, that you've encountered along the way the challenges that can come with how much time that can take up, and balancing with family and other commitments, and how the toll it can take on your heart. So with what you feel comfortable, what would you share about that?
I think, in some of the literature they talk about it as being like the cost of caring. I do think that there's almost an inevitability, and that there's kind of these ebbs and flows in doing the work, because you are engaging your heart. And if you're not engaging your heart, you're probably not being impactful in your work, right? So I've absolutely had times of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, and for secondary trauma, when it got bad enough, making sure I was doing my due diligence of going and getting professional help myself. This term self-care is like tossed around so much now, right? And yes, it's so important, right? And it is about going to yoga, and it's about meditating, it's about your diet. To me, what I think for myself, what I've come to recognize is ultimately it comes down to two things. It's self-compassion and doing my own inner work, right? It's like I have got to know myself, know what's happening in my own system, know when there are things to metabolize, it's just, that has to be like that. So to me, almost like self-care is like an attitude, right? It's an orientation, right? And then the actions to do that naturally flow from that attitude towards self, that I matter, right? I think that so often helping professionals, when I use the word helping professionals, I'm talking about, like you said, parenting, right?
Yes.
Hello, like heart-centered work. It's, environmental activists. It's our elected officials. It's first responders. It's teachers. Oh my gosh, teachers. Thank you to all you teachers out there. So when I say helping professionals, I'm really talking about beyond,
very broad, and
medical
very
and mental.
Yeah,
it's beyond medical and mental health professionals.
Anybody really doing work that they're passionate about, that they're invested in, right? That we were saying that it creates that spark and that joy, and with that comes pain sometimes, because there are things that get in the way of you accomplishing your goals, or you see suffering, whether that's suffering within the environment or human suffering or just systems at large suffering. Oh, I see that Rika is joining us.
Hi, Rika.
Hey, Rika, thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're a part of this conversation. But yeah, like and parenting, man, there's so many moments when you see kiddos that you're like, oh, it hurts you, and you know that sometimes a struggle is just what builds resiliency. It doesn't change the fact that it's painful to witness somebody struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that the idea of just like knowing thyself, and, heart-centered work tends to draw people, right? That they're the caregivers, they're the big-hearted, right, in the world. Unfortunately, I think the shadow side of that, so often that I see, is that there's a self-neglect, right? There's a perception of it being selfish in some way to put oneself first. I mean, how many moms with young children that I've worked with, right, that feel guilty about taking care of themselves. But it really does. It starts with, that's why I say it, like, starts with a shift in attitude. It's like that claiming that, like, I matter, as much, right? And it's just so much better to give from a place of overflow.
Abundance.
Right, abundance, and tapping out the well. Right?
Yes.
So, but the well does get tapped out, and so what does that look like?
And how do you start to identify? So you spoke of your own experience, and I've also, I think, like you said, it's really hard if you're doing this any sort of heart-centered work not to experience it, burnout or compassion fatigue. But when you know,
degrees of that, right?
And when you know, you're like, oh, I know what that is now,
right?
And so then it becomes there's some signs that you can start to identify, right? So what are some signs that you notice in yourself and your clients that are little signals that something's starting to be a little off, that the well is starting to go down?
Yeah, I would say disengagement, right? Whether that's disengagement in terms of disengagement from yourself, like not really tuned into yourself, kind of numbed out to what your own inner experience is. This could be disengagement more in your personal relationships. If like you're coming home and you're spending like more and more time in your bedroom getting changed and less time in conversation, or feel like you don't have anything left for those in your life, right? It's like when you start to feel that pull, that connection's harder, I think is a really good sign. I think, starting to not be able to have a compassionate lens toward others, whether it's in personal life or in work, right? When that you find yourself being a little bit more judgmental, right? Like, is this really an issue, what they're bringing up? Right.
I don't really feel like they are. Like,
and my own kids have gotten, the brunt of that at times when I have been burnt out, and that has actually been a sign for me, because I can remember one time, back, some years ago, working in community mental health with really impacted kids, really traumatized, impacted kids, and my own kids who were really young at the time, were really young, and they, were like, bothered about, I don't know, whatever, Susie on the playground, something that was really important to them. And I can remember this one time saying, like, I work with these, let me tell you what a real problem is. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. There's a red flag. There's like how could I miss that one?
But it can be hard, right?
Yeah,
because what I noticed, which... this is just any experience that you might have with some sort of training, because this happened, in my undergraduate studies as well, is in theory, in graduate school, we talked about self-care and how, it was so important when you're working for organizations that they're going to have this self-care model and how ethical that was. And then I get out in the real world and I was like, well, no one's really practicing this.
Right.
I thought this was going to be a thing. Like, there's lip service given to it, but it's like the way the schedule is, the caseload you're expected to carry, like the presentation you're supposed to bring, check all your stuff at the door, like all this stuff doesn't actually create the space for it. Like, it's not actually, there's not
and we're talking
room for
about
it.
the system issues, right?
Yes.
And whether that's an individual system like a school or a mental health organization,
or the Capitol.
Or let's
for politicians, let's like we were talking about.
Let's be real, right? Like I think about it in terms of like the system where the overculture that we're all living in, right? Like there is a level of do more. I think technology in all of its positive aspects, right? It's like the pace of life. I mean, we are bombarded with the message all the time that there's always something more to do. So I always say, you know, like when I was really working with teachers, I mean, they are so overworked and under-resourced that I would talk about it can feel like a radical act of rebellion almost to say, like, you know what? I matter. You know, where can I carve space for myself? Like this matters, this practice matters. And that's where, again, it comes back to, I think it really starts with an attitude, right? An attitude like that, I matter. I'm going to have my own back.
And I'm going to take care of myself. And be firm in that. Brene Brown says...
protective.
You know, soft front, hard back, you know?
Yes.
So
Amen.
being both. Being both assertive and connected. And the other piece that I was thinking about is... I went and saw a counselor when I was feeling overwhelmed with work. And one of the things that she said was, Melissa, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So what you practice every day is the rhythm of your life. And I was like, well, I don't like this rhythm. I don't like it at all. It's a terrible rhythm I'm practicing right now.
And that's that radical self-responsibility.
Yes. And so then I thought about, okay, well, what is the rhythm? If I think about my life, I really love music. So if I think about my life as a song, what do I want my daily song to be? What is the melody I want to create? And that can't just be, I save all my self-care, because that's what I was doing at the time, for the weekend.
Right. No.
It's got to be built in throughout the day. And how am I going to create that pause? And I tell my clients, thinking about their life, like in video games where you have a life bar. And even with positive experiences, they still can require energy and resources, so your life bar might still go down. Right? And so what is it throughout your day that is increasing their life bar? So you're not going in and seeing your family in the red zone, which is where it's flashing. And in the video game, that means you're about to die. No good.
I always talked, you know, I refer to those as like even the micro moments of self-care, right? And this is like during times of transition maybe, where can you just take a pause and take 3 deep breaths and connect back to yourself. You know, it's just like, it's like those moments where it's like our focus is so outward. It's like just taking that moment to like, it's like returning home, right? It's returning home to our own heart, you know, our own self, right? And I mean, and that's what creates real connection, right? Like that's what is helping professionals that are heart-centered people in the world. That's where it has to come from. That's where it has to come from, you know. And so how do you tend to that? You know, how do you make sure that you are staying connected to that?
So for you, it's pausing. What are other things that you might practice throughout the day that help you with that?
I'm a big tea drinker. Like it might just be like, I'm pouring myself this nice cup of tea. It can be such small things like, did I drink enough water? Oh, I feel like, hey, I have to go to the bathroom and I'm going to kid myself that I can do one more session, right? No, right? Taking care of your own needs, right? What's happening in my body, right? What's happening in my body? Like staying connected to one's body.
And checking in.
Checking in, yeah.
And like, well, you guys can't see this, but Mindy has this beautiful view of the South Table Mountain, and just even pausing and looking outside, right? Like, and taking time. And you can even do that in session. Like I've been doing, I do a lot more outdoor-based therapy, and when clients are open to it, taking us outside. And not only is it so good for them and nourishing for them, because they're not typically pausing, so it's modeling that, but it's also good as the practitioner. Like, it helps me be more sustainable and more
Absolutely.
present and more a part of what's going on for them, because I'm also like taking care of myself. So I'm modeling why that's so important, and the client is experiencing what that's like, and overall we're just creating that pause, that slowing down, because nature naturally brings you into that space.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And
Like-
I'm lucky to have this really beautiful space even in the backyard. So there's a lot of times that even with clients, it's like, you want to go for a walk? You don't want to walk? What if we even just started out there? A little grounding, take shoes off, touch the earth, take in a tree, take some breaths, like those couple of minutes can
Be very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Big
Shift your whole reality.
One of the things I was thinking is, I would imagine a lot of teachers and helping professionals, like we're talking about, folks that might be public servants, the first responders, teachers, activists, all these folks might not even recognize that this is something that's happening to them. So I was thinking, when you worked with teachers, what were common responses they had when you're like, hey, we have this program and we really want to support you around compassion fatigue and possible secondary trauma? What were a lot of their responses when you guys initially introduced?
Yeah. Who has time for that?
Yeah, right. I've heard that.
Yes.
That sounds like a lecture.
Or where to start, and so I would, talking about, if you have this, I would say, like, start small, make that like little tiny goal that that you can hit 100% of the time, versus the big goal,
Too much.
right? That then it's like you fall short, and then that's an invitation for not taking care of yourself, or an invitation for maybe beating yourself up a little bit because you didn't achieve your goal, right? So if it's like, people be like, I'm going to start working out 6 times a day. And I was like, well, what about this first week, right? Maybe it's every day you're taking a walk around the block, but like, so start small, and then if you surpass that, great. Awesome, right? But sometimes it is in the starting small, because then when you're already feeling overwhelmed, when you're already feeling taxed, you don't want self-care to feel like another to-do on your list, right?
You want it to feel, you want to be able to do enough that you experience relief, right? Because that's the goal, but not enough that it overwhelms you.
In
or
all
you
the
feel
other
like
parts of your life.
impossible. Yeah. And building that momentum, right? And so...
and rituals and routines are another great thing that I would always suggest as a starting place.
Okay.
So this may be, at the beginning of your work day, or at the end of your work day, right? You get to you're in your car about to go into work, or you're at the end of the day and get back in your car. What can be some sort of ritual, right? Maybe it's taking some breaths in the morning and thinking about what you want your mindset or heart set to be that day. Like just setting an intention, right? Something small like that can make a world of a difference. Another thing that I would always encourage teachers to do is, at the end of the day, think about 3 good things. Not the 3 good things like the gratitude practice, which is wonderful, but 3 good things that you did, right? 3 days or 3 ways that you felt like you were an effective teacher that day. Right, and again, that's that acknowledgement of self, coming back to self. So I think rituals, practices. Some people I've worked with have visualized like clearing off energy that wasn't theirs. And those are practices that can take literally 1 minute. So it doesn't have to be this big insurmountable. How am I going to make time for the 60-minute class?
Well, and that's even another thing when somebody's like, well, I really love yoga, or I really love doing different things, but I just don't have time. The internet's so cool this way. Like, I'm a big proponent. There are great yoga studios, and that's wonderful. And
Gaia subscription.
Yeah, it's like there are a lot of things online which are so
YouTube's
great.
free.
Yeah, there's YouTube classes that are $5, 10, 15, whatever
Yeah,
you have.
absolutely.
And you just doing that, right? Again, it goes back to it's much more important what you practice daily than for how long. It's creating that little ritual every single day that starts to create that rhythm that you're looking for.
Yeah.
That those pauses where there's for a lot of my folks that are very overcommitted,
overextended. Isn't that the American way?
It's so true. Yes, I invite them. It's always an invitation. There's a really great book by two sports psychologists, The Power of Full Engagement, and what the basic principle of that book is it's not about how we manage time, it's about how we manage our energy. And in that book, they identify 4 types of energy: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And spiritual being purpose, meaning. We're not necessarily talking about a religious aspect, but what meaning are you deriving in your life? And what they have found is with elite athletes, with folks that are really even high performers in business, they are very clear on what it takes to manage those energies and what they need every single day. And what that book talks about is most Americans, working Americans or folks that are just committed to a lot of things, overextend their physical and mental energies and don't get enough time to connect with their emotional and spiritual energies.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And so if you think about muscles, if you're overextending them, right, they are more likely to become injured. So physically, our bodies break down. Mentally, we struggle. I think about our brains being like a computer. And if you have too many computer screens, programs open, the computer crashes or glitches.
Well, and then along with that, if you're not giving enough attention to your emotional and spiritual energy, right? To me, those are like the fuel, right? Like those are like fire, reconnecting to what is meaningful and really knowing what's happening in your emotional world. I think that's the first place it lands, right? And if it's ignored and not tended to, we're talking about the mind-body emotional connection here, right? It's all interrelated. And if you're not tending to your emotional life, that energy, right? That whether it's trauma that's stored in the cells of the body, if it's an energy, whatever is stuck in there, it's going to manifest another way, right? So if you don't metabolize it when it's emotional, it's going to become a physical symptom. Like
or a mental,
right?
So, and when we're talking about that's like cognitive processing, your ability to problem solve. Exactly, and that's actually what the book talks about. Is the parts that we tend to not give space for or not direct our focus, the emotional and spiritual energies, is what fuels the other energies. And so it's all, like you said, all interconnected and can have such a significant impact. And so the work that we do, or other helping professionals do,
other heart-centered work, people who are doing heart-centered work,
yes,
right?
Whatever that looks like, massage therapy, acupuncture, yoga teachers, like there's a lot of practitioners trying to support this self-care, and within that capacity, we all can benefit from practicing that, right?
Well, and I think it's also important to talk about the other side, because when you talk about what are the protective factors, to either mitigate, help you metabolize what's there. And Laura, I always butcher her last name, Vandernoot Lipsky.
Okay.
Is her last name. That's Laura, first name. She has 2 amazing books. One is called Trauma Stewardship.
Okay.
It's designed for like the broad umbrella of kind of helping professionals we're talking about here.
Okay.
Amazing book that's all about like just this. She manages to tackle a really challenging subject, right? Like the impact of trauma, others' trauma on us, in a really hopeful, uplifting way, which is just brilliant. And then her second book, Age of Overwhelm, is really that we're living in an age of overwhelm. So that's not just for helping professionals, that's for anyone. But she talks about the importance of metabolizing, right? And I love that idea, just this, we have to metabolize what we encounter each day, right? and how it's impacting our inner life, our inner world. And when you're doing these kind of doing this kind of work in the world, it's so important, right? Protective factors, right? Those things that also build resilience. That's another really important part of the conversation. I think for me, anyway, I go to that meaning making. You know, can I choose an orientation each day? That it is such a privilege to do what I do in the world, right? To see and learn about what it means to be resilient and grow through witnessing, right? Those that we work with and their resilience, right? So that's like vicarious resilience.
Yes.
That's a beautiful, amazing thing, right? To know that we are doing work that's meaningful and matters. How do we remind ourselves of that? I mean, like that, it's sacred work in the world. It's sacred work that we're doing in the world.
It's an honor to do. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so how do we, so for me every day there's this choice of intention, right? How am I going to orient to my day and my work in the world?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a good way to wrap up here, Mindy.
Fabulous.
Leaving that with our audience of, again, setting that intention. How are you going to orientate to the work you're doing and connect to that, whatever you're doing that feels meaningful and purposeful, that it is meaningful work and it matters and it's sacred and it's contributing to raising the health of our world at large.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been
great.
fun.
Yes, this was lovely. So I will leave Mindy's information in the comments, so you can check out her website if you would like to learn more about some of the programs she's worked with and how she works with helping professionals in her private practice. If you're like, you're listening to some of the stuff we talked about and you're like, I think I might have some of this going on. I really do need to create those self-care practices. It's really helpful to have that support. As Mindy and I have both mentioned, we in our own lives at different times have sought support professional support so that we could build these practices so that we could be more effective at the work we do and just be a more happy human,
a better human being.
Yeah, exactly. Like all around.
Yes. Like every once in a while, like forever ongoing therapy.
Yes, I was like, well, there is that.
What would I do without it?
Yes, it's an ongoing practice and or an ongoing part of our well-being, and that's so important. And it can manifest in different ways, so finding what works for you is so important. So if you have questions about that, please do reach out.
Sounds great. Please
to myself or Mindy. We're very passionate about that, like we said, and that's why we're talking about it. So thank you for joining us.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday.